Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à ce Tech Event organisé par le Technopole Brest-Iroise sur le sujet de ce matin, le management interculturel. Donc, nous allons accueillir François Huber, qui est consultant international et dirigeant de la société Mobilys Conseil. Donc, quelques règles avant de démarrer sur ce Tech Event. Vous pouvez garder votre caméra éteinte et vos micros éteints pendant l'intervention de François Huber. Et en fin de webinaire, vous pourrez poser vos questions, donc soit dans l'onglet discussion, ou vous pouvez prendre directement la parole pour poser vos questions à l'oral. Voilà, je vais laisser la main à François Huber qui va nous faire cette intervention en anglais ce matin.
Thanks. Hello, good morning, everybody. So I'm not going to introduce myself further because, well, I have a LinkedIn profile, so you can access that if you want more details. And I'm going to get directly into the topic. So the talk is intended for tech companies in Brest, so startups and tech companies. So that will be the case I will discuss during the morning. So what are you going to get today? First of all, we're going to talk about the basic principles of management, because usually in intercultural issues, we have the temptation to get directly into intercultural because that's the crux of the matter. But what we're trying to do if we're building a team and we're managing people is first managing. So we need to understand that before we start talking about intercultural issues. Then we'll talk about implementing that in international business. We'll get a little bit deeper into the intercultural dimensions in management. And eventually, I'll give you a few keys or a few things that are really important when you want to succeed in managing intercultural teams. So first thing, the basic principles of management. So I'm going to use the situational management styles. It's a very well-known concept. So maybe some of you are already familiar with that. That'll be like a reminder. If you think of the way you're managing people, there are two, or they can be two dimensions. One of them is whether you're going to be directive or not. So if you're not very directive, when you're working with your colleagues, you're showing them goals. So very broad directions where you want to go. If you're very directive, conversely, and you have a high directive behavior, you're giving instructions, detailed instructions, and then you explain really little by little what you want to do. There's another dimension, which is the relationship you're going to establish with your colleagues. So you can be supportive, so linking with your colleagues or not. So if you're not very supportive, you're going to focus on the job. You're going to focus on the facts, on what you're doing. And there's not going to be really an interpersonal relationship. And conversely, of course, if you have a high supportive behavior, then you establish a relationship. You're going to talk to the person, and it's going to be really human to human instead of focusing on the job. So based on that, you have 4 different management styles. So one of them is directing. So in a directing management style, you're giving detailed instruction and you focus on the job. So there's no real interpersonal relationship, and you really focus on what you're going to do. Then you have the coaching style, where you're also giving detailed instruction, but this time you're connecting with the people. The supporting style, where you're connecting with the people and you don't detail the job, you just give broad instructions. And eventually the delegating style, where you focus on the facts and you just give goals. So there's no interpersonal relationship and no details about the job at hand. So these are the 4 management styles. So at this point, what you can do is think for yourself, look at those 2 dimensions and those 4 styles, and select the one you would be more familiar with, the one that you would prefer, your favorite management style. So I let you just have a look and think about that. And now we're going to look at the people you're managing. Who are you working with? So here, there are two dimensions as well. One is the ability to do the job, so the skills. So that's quite simple. Just note that in this chart, usually, it's low on the left and high on the right. In this chart, it's the opposite. So high is on the left, low is on the right. And for the other dimension, high will be at the bottom and low at the top. So if you're high skills, you know how to do the job. And if you low skills, you don't know how to do the job. Pretty simple. Then the other dimension will be the will. So are you willing to do the job? Are you motivated? So if you high will, you want to do the job. If you low will, you don't want to do the job. And I don't want to talk too much about it, but when I say low will, it doesn't mean that you're lazy or anything like that. It's just that in a circumstance, if for some reason you're upset or confused or something, and you don't really have the will to get into what you have to do. So again, based on these two dimensions, there are four profiles, four maturity profiles, if you want. One is low skills, high will. Now, think of if you're a tech company in Brest, think of the kind of people you want to hire for an international team. So you can hire, for instance, a rookie, a beginner. So that would be someone who is really willing to work for your company, but doesn't have the skills yet because they've never worked in a company before. They just graduated. And then you have this kind of profile. So people highly motivated, but don't really know how to do the job. You can also have someone low skills, low will. So someone not motivated and not able to do the job. So you might wonder why you would want to hire someone like that. It's just a question of, for instance, here you can have someone with some potential. There are plenty of examples, but typically here you hire someone that's not worked in a company before, that doesn't know how to do the job, but has the abilities, has the potential. So again, sometimes if you're in Brest and you want to hire international people and you're a small technology company, it's not always easy to hire the people you would really want to have. And sometimes you have to settle for someone with potential that you know will become the right person, but that you have to train and to help to grow. Another profile could be high skills, low will. So someone that knows how to do the job, but again, confused or has difficulties with the situation. And eventually, high skills, high will. So someone that knows how to do the job and is motivated for the job. And now, of course, the question is, how do you match the profiles and the management styles? So we're going to start with someone who is low skills, high will. So again, a beginner. So if we have someone who is low skills, high will, how should we manage that person? Low skills. So if you look at the directive behavior, if the person is low skills, probably they need instructions, right? We can't just tell them, okay, this is what we want to do. You have to explain, you have to go step by step so that the people understand what they have to do. They have the knowledge if you want, but not the skills yet. So you have to explain. So we will be, if you look at the left hand side of the chart, we will be on the right side, directing or coaching, right? Now the person is high will. So do they need a supportive behavior? No, they're already motivated. So you don't have to motivate them. And that would be weird, trying to motivate someone who's already motivated. So no, you just focus on the job. You don't need to motivate. And so the right style seems to be directing. Someone low skills, high will needs to be directed. If we go now to low skills, low will. So a person who doesn't know how to do the job and lacks motivation. Well, it's the same thing as low skills, high will at the beginning. You need to be with a high directive behavior. You need to explain how to do the job. But this time, you also need to be supportive. You need to motivate the person. So you need a coaching style. And there you go. You understand now. The graphs are the same. For someone high skills, low will, you don't need to be directive. You just have to indicate the goals because the person knows how to do the job. So you just have to tell them what they need to do. But in this case, the person is low will, so you need to be highly supportive. And for someone who is high skills, high will, they know how to do the job and they want to do it. Well, you just have to tell them what to do, and you don't have to establish a supportive relationship. So it's just a fact. Okay, we need to do that, and go on, and the people will go on because they want to do it and they know how to do it. Okay, so those are the four typical maturity profiles and the four management styles. So what can we conclude from that? The first question would be, what is the best management style? Of course, if you remember the question I asked you earlier about your favorite management style, probably you thought, okay, I'm more like coaching, or I'm more like delegating, or something like that. If you're the best coaching manager in the world, you can still be a terrible manager, because the best management style is the one that suits the person in front of you. In other words, you need to understand your colleagues, understand what they need, and then you need to adapt your management style to this person to help them do their job, right? That's the principle of management. How to find the style that will help your team do their job. So the best management style is not this one or that one. It's the management style that matches the needs of the person you're managing. Now, in terms of performance, however, if I'm asking again, what is the best management style? There is another answer. There is one best management style, and we don't have the time to engage in a conversation, but so I'll give you the answer. The best management style is obviously delegating, right? It's delegating because when you're delegating, so we're in the bottom left corner, when we're delegating, we're not doing anything, right? We're just telling people, okay, this is what we need to do. Go ahead, bye-bye, right? So it's the most efficient management style for a manager. Remember, especially when you're in a tech company, that's what you want to do. You have a million other things to do. You're not just a 100% manager. You're doing plenty of things and you're managing people. So if you can use your time for other things, because the people you're managing are high skill, high will, they don't need you as a manager other than coordination and problem solving, and then you save a lot of time that is really useful. But that means that the people in your team needs to be high skill, high will, right? So if you have someone who is low skill, low will, you have to first train them, for instance, so they become high skill, low will, and then motivate them, and then okay, you've reached the delegating style, because people are high skill, high will. So when you hiring people, when you're creating your intercultural team, that is your challenge at the beginning, because people won't be high skill, high will right from the start. I will just add something about all this. Sometimes people misunderstand this concept, and they put people in boxes. They think, okay, people are like this or like that. Of course, this is totally wrong. It's a philosophy. It's an approach to managing people. And I'll take just two examples so you understand the complexity of this. First of all, people don't stay who they are, and you see that here. If you train people, you motivate people, they change, and so the management style changes, and people can change in other ways. People can become demotivated or something. That's one thing. And then people are not a kind of single block, right? People are motivated by this, not motivated by that. People are skilled for this, but not for that, and so on. So there's a million situations with a single person in which you need to adapt your management style maybe 3 or 4 times in the same meeting, right? So it's more complex than it looks like. Now, what can we draw from this? First of all, managing is helping your team members to perform, right? That's what you're doing. The best management style is the one that suits your colleague. And the sooner they can be managed by delegating, the better, right? That's what we need to remember about basic management styles. Now, if we get into the implementation in international business, so let's keep in mind everything we know now about managing people and look at international business. Well, if you think of the intercultural dimension, it's another dimension. We've seen that you have the skills, the will, but there's another thing. Do people understand other cultures? Does it apply? Social scientists have studied that, and they found that there are 3 different styles for the intercultural dimension. One is the ethnocentric style. So basically, you ignore the cultures, you culture blind. You don't care about culture, you use your culture and you go on as if there were no other cultures. So that's one end of the spectrum, if you want. Then at the other end, you have the polycentric style, where it's the total opposite. You not only you care about cultures, but you investigate, you study them, you connect with people, you try to really understand the details, to learn and to adapt your way to manage to the various cultures. And because the scientists are going a little bit further than what we've seen about management, and they've also found a synergy style, which is, as you can see in the middle, where you acknowledge that there are other cultures, you understand that, you try to understand how it works, but a little bit like in a black box. You don't really try to collect a lot of information and to bond with people. You just try to take it into account and avoid the mistakes and take advantage of some of the cultural differences. Now, if we get back to the previous management concepts that we studied, you understand that a style like the directing style, where you give detailed instructions and you're not connecting with the people, at first it didn't look very good. But when you understand the people, you think, oh yeah, but if you're managing a rookie, it's the right style. So it's not good or bad. It's just adapted for a certain situation. Now, if you look at ethnocentric now, you might think ethnocentric, culture blind. That doesn't make any sense. Well, apparently, if we apply the same reasoning, there might be some situation where ethnocentric is actually the best style or the appropriate style. And if you think about it, yes, there are situations where polycentric doesn't apply and ethnocentric would be better, and conversely. And again, we don't have time. We just have 45 minutes, so I need to give you the answer and we can't interact about that. But the ethnocentric style, apparently, and it's empirical, but it's kind of obvious, it works if the activities you're involved in are short-term and technical, right? Because you're not trying to build something. You're not trying to have a bond that you will use later on. So you don't invest in a relationship. And if it's very technical, actually, the cultural differences don't play a big part. So, okay, if your activities are short-term and technical, ethnocentric is fine. And conversely, of course, if your activities are long-term and the cultural aspect has an impact, then you need to be polycentric. And if you're in between, well, maybe synergy will be good enough. What can we deduct from this if we're thinking of intercultural management? You're building a team and you're going to manage this team for years. quite obviously, we're on the right side, right? Most business activities involving an intercultural team will be long-term, and the cultural dimension will play a big part. So unfortunately, you can't avoid the intercultural dimension. You can't be ethnocentric. You have to be polycentric, maybe sometimes synergy, but most of the time polycentric, right? So this is an important conclusion. You absolutely can't skip the cultural aspect in most international business interactions. There are very few activities that are really short-term and technical. Most of the time, you have to go beyond that. So you have to deal with the uh, intercultural dimension. And if you think of it, applying the management styles were discussed earlier is getting much more complicated, right? Because first of all, you have another dimension, the cultural dimension. And second, if you think of what the cultural, the management styles imply, you need to understand the people you have in front of you, right? To be able to deduct what kind of management style you need to apply. And when you are going to manage people from different cultures, that's going to be much more complex. Because, for instance, if with someone from your culture, it's kind of easy to detect whether the people are motivated or not. With some other cultures, that might be more difficult. They might look motivated and actually there's something wrong, but you don't have the ability to find the cues telling you that something is wrong, because it's another culture. You can't decode it the same way as people from your own culture, right? So already we see that, right, we get into something much more complicated. Now, when you're managing people, this takes place in an organization. Your company works in a certain way. For organization, it's there's also a dimension, you could say, or two extremes. One is typically the hierarchy. So you work in a top-down manner. So you have here the CEO, the managers, the team. And what happens is the CEO makes the decisions and have them implemented down the pyramid. So CEO makes the decision, the managers work on compliance, so they make sure the decisions are implemented the right way, and the teams just execute, right? So we're doing what we told. That's the principle of the hierarchy. At the other end, you have the bottom-up or subsidiarity, where people work in a certain form of autonomy, if you want. So the structure looks about the same, but here it's bottom up. So what happens is the team is performing, the managers are coordinating, and the CEO works on, focuses on a strategy, right? So there's again, I could spend hours talking about this. It's quite different, and there are consequences on the way the company is organized, on reporting, for instance, on the way decisions are made, because at this point here, then the team is making decisions. And so there's a lot of things like you're not in a situation like do what you told, you're more in a situation like tell me what you're doing. And so there are plenty of issues. How to decide what model to choose, especially again if you're a tech company in Western Britain. Again, I'm jumping at the conclusions, but this would need a lot of explanations. But on the left, basically a pyramid works, and again, it's the same reasoning. Okay, it's not one is good and one is bad. It's just that there are contexts in which you can use one and contexts in which you can use the other. If what you're doing is business as usual, you're constantly doing the same thing. Maybe think of a workshop, right? You're manufacturing products and it's the same products all the time. So a top-down hierarchy works well, right? Nothing to discuss, nothing to change, no evolution. You just find the right way to do business. You do business, and you define procedures, and you implement these procedures, right? And at the other end, you have something complex, fast changing, and unpredictable, right? If you have an environment like that, just so you understand, the CEO cannot make the decision. There are too many decisions to be made about too many things, so it's impossible to have all the expertise for the whole company to make decisions here and there. You have to be a kind of demigod, and so that's impossible because there are too many variables, too much knowledge to master. Now, if you look at international activities, right? So you have your team for the various regions in the world. So it's an intercultural team. What do you have to manage? You have time zones, obviously. Then you have cultures. You have markets. They're all different and behave in different ways with different history and so on. Business practices, they're not the same either. Legal environments, just this, the legal environments are completely different. Think of continental Roman German law and common law and stuff like that, or the legal context in Japan, or and evolutions, because all this is not static. It's a moving thing, and globalization makes you accelerate a million things. So typically, this is on the right side of the previous line, right? It's a complex environment, fast changing, unpredictable. So clearly here, you need to be delegating a lot of the decisions. You need to work with autonomous people that can tell you what they're doing instead of you telling them what to do, right? It's really what it is. And if you think, sometimes, some people say, yeah, but I'll put my team, everybody will be in Brittany, so it'll be easier and I'll be with them and so on. What do you change when you do that? Okay, you change the time zones. Now they're in your time zone, but they have the problem now because they work with another time zone, and all the rest, nothing has changed, right? So you cannot solve this complexity thing in any organizational way. You have to rely on the people, and so you cannot manage the complexity of international business with a hierarchy. It's just impossible. It doesn't work. And even if you locate your people at the headquarters, that won't work. So if you think of the previous management styles we had before, you need to reach the delegating style. It's another reason why you need to reach the delegating style, because you can't tell people what they have to do. They need to tell you what they're doing, and they need to know what they have to do. You can't know. Even for a small number here, we have 7 people. Even with a small number of people, it's unmanageable by one single person if you try to micromanage everybody and tell them what to do. So if you doubt that, we can still go a little bit deeper in the intercultural dimensions and see. So here I'm going to use a concept that has been developed by social scientists decades ago, but it's been refined by Erin Meyer, a researcher at INSEAD, and she's written a book called Culture Map. Here, I'm going to start with one of the typical example. It's a dimension discovered by Edward Hall about explicit and implicit cultures. So we're going to look at the extreme, and we're going to try to locate ourselves. So France is on the right, but closer to the middle than to the extremes. And the extremes are the United States and Japan. So what happens? If you're working with American people, if they tell you something, it's what they say, right? It's just what they say. There's nothing, there is no suggestion, there is no subtitle. If you're working with them and they say, I don't like this aspect of the strategy, it's not a message that you did something wrong or there's nothing to deduct. It's just what they mean, right? They don't like this aspect of the strategy, and that's it. So you can discuss that, but that doesn't start a reasoning about a relationship or something. Conversely, if you're in Japan and someone says, I don't like this aspect of the strategy. You need to think a lot what that means, because depending on who you are, who that person is, the context, what happened before, what is supposed to happen next, you have to take everything into account to really understand why at this precise moment this person has said that, and the content of the message might actually be much less important than the context in which the person makes the statement, right? And if you look at France, well, we're somewhere in the middle. We have a lot of typically, for instance, when people tell you something when you were talking to your manager, for instance, they tell you something. Sometimes it's a polite way to suggest, no, you did something wrong, right? But they don't clearly say you did something wrong, but from from the way that was told, and because it's not really in the context and so on, you think, oh, I must have done something wrong, right? So you understand something, and the problem is, if you put an American guy in the exact same situation, they won't understand anything, because they're not used to that. They're not used to trying to understand the context, right? So if you look at um, um, American and French relationship, we would need to be more explicit, and they would need to try and understand the context a little more. And if you look at a French Japanese relationship, that would be the opposite, right? We would need to understand the Japanese context, and they would need to be to stop trying to decode things where there's nothing to decode. The key thing that is usually not discussed when we're talking about these dimensional, these culture dimensions, is the reason why it is like this in the US and it's like that in Japan. And the reasons are, if you think of it, if you think of the history of the United States, it's not so surprising that they're so explicit, because the United States is a community built from people, built with people from all around the world, right? So at one point, when Americans were talking to each other in the previous centuries, when they were talking about a contract, for example, they couldn't use the context, because a German guy would talk to a British guy, or um, um, or an African guy, and so they couldn't use the cultural context, because they belonged to different cultures, and so the lowest common denominator was just being explicit. So you say something, and that's all there is. And that's why Americans, for instance, put so much emphasis on a contract, because they cannot infer or deduct or suppose, assume things. They just have a contract, they write everything, and then we say, okay, we agree on what is written, and that's all, right? Which is not exactly what happens in France. And now, if you think of Japan, why is uh, um, Japan so implicit? Why is the context so important? Because if you look at the history of Japan, Japan was a word in itself, was cut from the rest of the world for centuries. For centuries, Japan was on its own, wouldn't accept any relationship with other countries. It's an island, but here it was an island really on its own for centuries. And historically, it was opened by gunboats, American gunboats. So it really never really totally opened. It was cracked open by the Americans, but the Japanese community is still pretty much closed to outsiders. So they had the time, just like private jokes, right? The Japanese culture is like an enormous private joke, and we're outside that, right? So what can we deduct from this? First of all, the cultural dimensions are derived from local history. And that's why, for instance, if you look in the middle of the uh, of the um, uh, of the chart here, you see Poland and Brazil. There's no particular reason why Poland and Brazil are close to each other. It just happens, right? Because they have a history, and for some reason, the result of that history is that they're in the middle of the chart, not extreme in explicitness or implicitness. So because of that, there is no rule. You can't deduct anything. There is only knowledge. You understand how the Russians work if you're working with Russians, if you're learning about Russia, if you're getting an example, if you're getting practice, right? And even then, experienced people, just because you worked in a country for a long time is no guarantee that you will understand, right? Only being born in a country and being part of a community um, um, makes it a guarantee, right? So, and of course, some people who worked in Germany and Denmark have no particular advantage when it comes to working in Korea or Iran, right? So that's a first conclusion. Now, if we go to another dimension, here we have a disagreement management. So the idea that you can have a disagreement in management relations or not. And if we look at where we are now, the US, Japan, and France, France is on the left. It's kind of extreme, right? The US this time is in the middle, and Japan is still on the right. What does that mean? It means that if you have a discussion with your manager and you disagree, right? So typically the manager says, "I don't like the way you've done that," or "This didn't work," and you saying, "Yes, but your instruction were not clear or were not consistent," right? So if you're French, this is fine, right? Because okay, we used to debate, we used to argue, and there's nothing inherently wrong in telling your manager, no, but your instruction weren't clear. The manager won't be scandalized and won't be shocked. They will defend themselves. They will maybe use their authority or something, but it's a normal way to behave in France. You know, when you disagree with the government, you take to the streets, and that's it. And it's normal. We have demonstrations every day. And that's the way we work in France. If you're in the US, that's surprising. If you're in the US, Americans will voice a disagreement, but they will this time, maybe surprisingly, they will be indirect, and this is more like the positive culture of the US. You don't tell people, for instance, that something's wrong. You work on solutions. You think, oh, this should be improved, you know, rather than say, oh, this doesn't work. You know, it's the typical thing that the French people criticize and Americans don't. So the US has another way to deal with this. And if you go to Japan this time, it's an entirely different ball game. Of course, you will never tell someone in Japan you did something wrong, right? You will send a totally indirect message that something happened, and they will have to draw the conclusions that something was wrong. But if you tell someone you've done something wrong, they lose their face. You know, it's the typical Asian thing that you cannot do. So again, here this is very difficult to deal with because first of all, um, you can have so that for us it's okay, but for a lot of people to the right of us on this chart, confrontation can be okay, right? So again, in France, confrontation is okay on both sides. We agree to disagree, right? And it's fine. Um, in other countries, no, it doesn't work like that at all. So you can't disagree. And I have, again, plenty of examples, but unfortunately, we don't have enough time. And conversely, in some places, if you fight, it can be a disaster whether you win or not. It's not the point. You just don't fight. It's not possible, right? Uh, and again, it's not logical. It's not based on anything that you can you know, you can calculate or anything. No, it just depends on the local practices. So being logical doesn't help, right? It's only learning. So here you have the kind of conclusion of the culture maps of Erin Meyer. You see that she worked on 7 dimensions, and you see that the countries are all over the place, right? It's not some countries are here or some countries are there. So Erin Meyer worked on 7 dimensions, but there are others. I work on more than that. I guess because she's a researcher, she worked on 7 dimension and then she wrote the book, but she knows there are more. It's just that she didn't work on them yet. Um, so there's a lot of complexity, a lot of dimension, and a lot of aspects to deal with in intercultural relationships. And some of the conclusion, everything is relative. So you don't have some countries doing this and other countries doing that. You have a spectrum of countries, and depending on the dimension you were talking about, you can be here or there, right? So there are no groups of countries that behave in a certain way. And it's not even countries actually. It's communities. Sometimes the borders are completely irrelevant. This is totally crazy. It's tricky. It's evolving. It's heterogeneous. It's evolving. So, for instance, the typical example is China, where we have a lot of works explaining how China is a collective place where people think in terms of group and so on. And now we have the new generation of Chinese who are all single children because of the single child policy, in a word that is developed from a very rural traditional society into a modern rich society. And so everybody is getting very individualistic, and so everything we know about China about 20 or 30 years ago today is uh, totally irrelevant or useless. So there's nothing fixed, and the conclusion of this is only practice and learning can save you, right? It's not just you learn a few principles and you're done. No, it's an everyday job, and there's a lot of things to understand and to work with. So it's very, very complex, right? And that's why you have plenty of people specialized in this, because you need coaching, you need training, you need to have a lot of practice. Now, a few keys. We're approaching to the end of the workshop. A few keys about that. What can you do in order to improve your odds of success in managing intercultural teams? First of all, the emotional intelligence. You remember, you need to understand the people in front of you if you want to find the right management style. And on top of that, now you have the cultural dimensions that act like a smoke screen between you and the people you're managing. So already, if you want to be a good manager, you need emotional intelligence to understand what your colleagues need. In intercultural relationships, you need a kind of superpower of emotional intelligence, because it's even much more complex, right? So that's one of the things you can work on. You need to be cool, right? You need to understand that the people who are going to come and work in your intercultural team, they're a little bit on their own. They need to be autonomous. They need to manage their stuff. Nobody can really help them because they're working on their part of the world, on their culture, on their market. And you can't micromanage them. You can't tell them what to do. So they need to feel invited. They need to belong to your intercultural community. So you need to create an environment where they really feel good, and they feel they're doing a good job, and they feel they can develop, and they can become the high skill, high will people you need, because you can only delegate them, right? So forget about the idea of I'm going to tell them what to do, and in this company it works this way and so on. No, this will never work with an intercultural team. You need to interact. So that might be counterintuitive, because you think, hey, I'm supposed to delegate. But delegating doesn't mean that you leave people alone. You need to delegate. Okay, they do what they need to do. They make the decisions, they organize their work and so on. But you can be in touch with them constantly. You can be available for them. You can discuss issues with them, and working together with them. It's just that you manage them with a lot of autonomy for them, but it doesn't mean that you're away and that you're not interested in what they're doing. So there's a way to interact with them, and that's very important, because otherwise, again, they're on their own, they're alone. And so it's not the way it should work. It's a community, it's a working community. and for the same reasons, you need to lead and you need to react. You can't just let things happen. When something's wrong, you can't just think, okay, I'll let it develop for a while and see what happens. No, you need to be really hands-on. You need to look at the issues. You need to make decisions. The decisions you can make, of course, not the decisions that are up to your team, but you need to follow really what happens and make decisions when something is needed, right? So 4 essentials. So the takeaways for today after this workshop: basic principle of management. What you're doing is to try to help your team to do their job. Your management style should be the right one for your colleagues. The implementation in international business, you can't skip the cultural aspect. It's really important in your business for concrete reasons. And it's not just, oh yeah, we care about cultures. You need to delegate because it's too complex for you to tell people what they have to do. If you add the cultural dimensions, the problem is they have an impact. They're relative, so there is no rule. You need to understand what happens all the time on everything. And the only way to do that is to learn a lot of things. And so what can help you to do that? First, emotional intelligence, be cool, interact, lead and react. And that's it. I'm available for questions um, if you have any. Thanks.
Thank you, François. Yes, so if you have any questions, you can either write your question in the discussion tab, or you can just raise your hand and ask your question either in English or in French. I don't see any question right now or any hand raised.
Everybody's stunned. All of this early in the morning.
Some comments with thank you. It was very interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm reading the comments.
Maybe one question, François, regarding a strategy to address a new market for a company. Do you think they should either recruit someone locally from the country, or they should maybe work first with someone from their own country and send someone there to begin? Or what would be the best strategy in your opinion?
I think the options are always open, depending on the country, depending on the market, depending on the company, the organization, or the stage of maturity of the company. There's always plenty of options because if you so of course. If you're in Brittany, the first thing you're going to do is to connect with Bretagne Commerce International, and then you will the advisors there will tell you, okay, you can connect with our correspondent in the country, and then you can investigate. And when you investigate, you will discover that depending on what you're trying to sell, what kind of market you're addressing, whether you, for instance, whether you have plenty of potential customers or just 2 or 3 key accounts. Sometimes it's better just to do business from where you are. Imagine you have 2 or 3 key accounts, maybe just connecting with the Bretagne Commerce International correspondent. You will manage the market from your company because it's very technical, and so there is no point in putting someone in between. But if you need to explore the market, you need to talk to prospects and investigate who could be your customers, and there's dozens of companies and so on. So definitely you need to work with someone, maybe not someone over there. Think, for instance, you want to work with Germany, you don't have to go and hire someone in Germany. Of course, it's always a great option, but you probably need to hire someone who is German, right? It's always the best way to manage the country. But then there are other ways. For instance, I worked with a company where we tried to penetrate the American market, to connect to the American market, and we didn't understand at that time the structures, the global structures. You don't do business in the US the way you do in business in smaller national markets. And so in the US, for instance, there's a lot of agents, people who have a catalog of dozens of technologies and know the key accounts very well. And so if you work with them, everything is simple. If you try to reach all the key accounts yourself, they don't have time for you. And everything is very hard. So there's not one single approach. You really need to look at one single market, your abilities, and I would say you need to talk to BCI almost each time, and especially to their local correspondent, because the local correspondents, that's one of the real strengths of BCI. They have people in the field that have been working in the country for decades sometimes, and so everything is simple. If you go to Poland, for instance, they have a great organization in Poland. People who really you have French people and Polish, and they've been living there like forever, so they know everything about the country. It's really very effective.
Okay, thank you. There is another comment.
Yes, Calden. Yeah. Thanks, Calden. Great comment.
Okay, but I don't see any other questions. So, another comment.
Great. That's the beauty of webinars. We have everybody here. Yeah. So from the Netherlands, and so if you're from the Netherlands and you want to connect with the French better, surprisingly, maybe the Erin Byers book, about culture map can help you. For the people in the workshop who don't know the Netherlands have a reputation for consensus. It's one of the cultures in the world where people, before making a decision, try to agree together on making the decision. And it's an interesting example, because when you try to understand why the Dutch are like this, whereas other communities around the Netherlands are not necessarily like that, including France, where we're not really consensual. Traditionally, the explanation is that it's linked to the management of the polders, because the polders and the way you would manage the area was linked to how much water that would be there, and how much water you would pump back to the sea, and so the people in a certain area needed to agree on that level of water, and so it's ingrained in the culture of the Dutch. But I've never found out if this was just a nice story or something really really concrete historical truth. It's funny, nobody has any questions. I would expect I don't know, a startup or a tech company to have specific questions about a situation or problem you can have in building your team or managing a foreign market.
And François, do you have maybe some advice to implement an efficient delegating management in an international context? You have already told us some info, but if you...
Yeah, that's a great question, because in 45 minutes, obviously, I'm just showing things, but I can't really get in the details of anything. But delegating is a tricky thing. I just suggested it once or twice, because delegating, the idea is that it's the lowest level of involvement in management, but it's still managing. Just because you're delegating doesn't mean the coordination disappears, or that people can solve the problems on their own. So you need to be to give a lot of autonomy to your followers, but you also need to be there to discuss issues and so on. And so people sometimes have difficulties to adjust because, for instance, if you go to the coffee machine and you tell your colleagues, hey, I know you're going to have a shipment in 2 weeks, so how's this going? And then if you have a good relationship, people will talk to you, and they will like you, right? Because they will think, oh, you remember, he's interested in my work, he cares, and so they will talk to you, will give you plenty of information, and they will go back to their desk thinking it's really nice person. Whereas if you ask, if you really inquire, and you say, yeah, about the shipment in 2 weeks, is everything fine? I've seen this and that and that, and people will think, hey, this is my job, I'm able to do it, and they will be angry at you, right? And so if you add the intercultural layer on top of that, that can be nightmarish. So one of the keys to really find the right balance is in communicating a lot about your intents, what you want to do, and the reasons why you do things. You have to be explicit for this time, and really explain, for instance, to your team at the beginning that there are cultural dimensions, that you're trying to manage that, and that you're delegating. All this doesn't have to be hidden in a corner of your desk. This can be on the table. You can tell people, I need you to be autonomous. This is the only way we can do business. So I will give you a lot of autonomy, but I'm here, and so on. You need to clarify all this so that people understand what is expected from them. And this is not, delegating doesn't mean I leave people in the dark about what we're doing. It means I empower people, and empowering people starts with giving them the information and working together. There's a lot of discussions about the short term and long term. This is a long term thing, so it's a partnership. You have to share information. You get to make sure everybody understands you're working together to grow the cake and so on. It's another aspect of management.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the question. I just read the Calden's message. Well, this is again, this is an entire aspect of. I don't know if that's better, but again, if you've lived in the U.S., I understand why you're asking the question, because if you want to expand in the U.S., this country is so self-centered and on top of the world and so on, and it's the first economy in the world and so on, that for investors, for instance, but also for customers, it can only work with you if you're an American company. So yes, you need to have an American company. Sometimes you need to move to the US with your company. Sometimes, especially if you have investors over there, but you need to open an American company. And yes, in some instances, it's good that this company is led by one of the founders, because then it looks even more like an American company. It's not like a kind of puppet company manipulated from Brittany. It's really a local company that works on its own, even if it's 100% owned by the Breton company. So yes, it can be an approach. I'm really thinking about the US, where it's a common way to really access this market, especially if you're in technology. You can't just have a few salespeople over there. So sometimes it works because you come once in a while to support them on the technical aspects. But most of the time, the best way is, yes, to have the experts directly over there in an American company, so that the American customers don't start to think, oh, it's a French company or not, or what happens. They just work with American people, and maybe the boss is French. They don't care about that. It's a multicultural society. So I hope it answers your question, Calvin.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I think we will just end the webinar this morning.
Yeah, it's time anyway.
Thank you very much, François. Thank you for your insight.
You're welcome.
And
thanks for having me.
And have all a nice day. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. Bye.